Welcome to episode 266 of the Actual Astronomy Podcast. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane. We are amateur astronomers who love looking up at the night sky, and this podcast is for anybody else who likes going out under the stars. How was your week, Shane?
Not too bad. Not much on the observing front to report. I did a little solar observing, but not much to, really develop an observing report. Surprisingly, there wasn't a lot of prominences when I was looking, it might have been after we recorded last week, actually. There was a few, but nothing. I think I'm getting spoiled by all of the recent, huge prominences and tons of activity that it just seemed a little mundane that day, which is a bad perspective. I should just enjoy it no matter what is there. But no nighttime observing for me. Just didn't work out the way my week was. I was kind of busy in the evenings, actually, on a personal note. So that's that. Yeah. Just engagements with family and such. So
okay.
Yeah. Nothing bad. But how about you? How was your week?
Good. Yeah, I got a couple nights in. Not sure if I did a Mars sketch. Actually, I should have put it in
the ink sketch.
What's that?
Was it the ink one? Oh no, the Jupiter one is what I'm thinking of, right?
Oh, the Jupiter one. Yeah, I didn't put that in the notes either, but yeah, I just dropped it in there now. I did CC you on a reply to a listener there. I did a sketch of Mars last Monday morning, and when I observed it and did the sketch, I was a little skeptical. I wasn't really certain of this. So this is that. I don't know. Did I tell you about this? This is another new sketching process that I'm working on.
Oh, well, tell me about it. I don't know if we've chatted about this one.
I can't remember if we did either, because I think I might have just kind of mentioned it. And there was a sketch of Mars I did about a month ago, and Mike Gatto, who's a graphic designer that I know from the Halifax RASC Astronomy Center. Anyway, I always really, really loved actually his Mars sketches. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I like the most about them is they're more like true color, but sort of more importantly for what I was going for is by using a combination of your field sketches, and then I have to do a good sketch. He's just able to take his field sketches, I think, and then putting it into software, and then using what you annotated, or at least what I annotate in my field sketches, and incorporating those in to get more subtle details in a more accurate portrayal. Because by adding in layering, you're able to put things in different tones, right? So typically with Mars, if I have a dark feature, I just have my white paper, my circle or 90% circle. And then I'll just sort of scratch those in with graphite. If it's a polar cap, it's just a circle. But then if it's a polar hood, which is a cloud combination over the South Polar cap these days, you can't really see this. You can't see the South Polar cap. Then it's just a dotted line, and it becomes a real abstraction of what you're seeing, right? So you kind of need a key to actually look and then understand, and it's not really immediately apparent what I was seeing. So what I do is, or what I've been attempting to do, is to do a series of sketches. I did 3 sketches, and then I took the one that sort of was the more interesting, and then I made a good copy, and then I sort of scanned it in, colored it orange-ish to reflect the color I was seeing through my Mars filter, and then I added in the North Polar cap, which I could see, South Polar hood, and then some limb haze or cloud or whatever. And I hadn't looked at any sketches prior to doing my session at all. I just went out and sketched, and I was like, oh, I don't know about this. It felt really sketchy. I don't know. It just was not, I was just kind of doubtful of what I was seeing and everything. And then Jerry Shmerkansky, who's an observer over in Winnipeg, he's got a beautiful 7-inch Mac Newtonian that he observes with using a binocular. And he had done a sketch, I think 2 days before, and his looked very different than mine. And so I was like, oh, and he's like a way better observer than I am, at least when it comes to observing Mars and sketching it. And I was like, oh, I don't know about my sketch now. I feel really, and I had posted it and then he posted it. I was like, oh, this isn't so good. But yeah, in the end, it looks like maybe some of the haze had cleared off the northern polar hood. And then, yeah, you could see like he captured the limb haze and the south polar hood and some of the other features. But I was able to see like the Tharsis region. And I had read that there had been there's a bit of a dust storm in some areas of Mars. So it's not like totally dusted up, but it may have been sort of obscuring one of the features that I saw that he didn't put down. And then some of his features were slightly different than mine. Just it's amazing how much Mars can change in just a few days, maybe is what it boils down to. So it's kind of hard to compare your sketch to somebody else's when they did it, several days out of your workflow. So anyway.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. It's always neat to hear about these different styles and approaches.
Yeah. I think it looks really cool, though. I think my Mars looks almost like if the Simpsons were going to Mars. I think it looks very cartoon. And, yeah. So, but I did find a listener. I wrote him, but I didn't write back. Anyway, there was, I shouldn't say listener, a poster from Cloudy Nights. Somebody had posted an image of Mars taken about 2 to 3 hours after I did my sketch. They're over like on the West Coast or close to the West Coast of the US. So not too far from here, global wise. And they had captured the North Polar Cap. So I was concerned that I actually didn't see the cap, that I had misinterpreted the hood, which is just like clouds around the polar region. But it looked like that a lot of the polar cap, or a lot of the polar hood, had kind of like blown out or something between when Jerry had done his sketch and when I did mine. And and then you could see, like, I think it's called Chasma Borealis. And I was having trouble like getting, it almost seemed like I could see sort of like around the top of the cap. And I was like, man, that's really weird. But anyway, I kind of sketched it that way. And then, but it was kind of like blurring. And then when I looked at the images that people had taken, you could see there was like the Chasma Borealis. So you could see kind of where it might sort of flip in and mask the other part of the cap. Anyway, sort of a bit rambly there, but good Mars observation.
Yeah, for sure. And then you were out, was it last night with Jupiter?
Last night. Yeah. So had a listener, you know what? I'm going to break with the thing and I'm going to scroll down. Yeah, I'm going to read Bob's email first.
Okay.
Because this actually, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I'm just going to highlight it in yellow so we don't tread back over it. But we'd been talking about moon transits on Jupiter, like the 4 bright Galilean moons that go across Jupiter and cast their shadows. And one of the things that I'd mentioned is I like watching these, but when we make up our data for the Observer's Handbook and the Observer's Calendar that I edit, and a lot of the other sources that you'll see online, we only often refer to the double shadow transits because they're a little bit more rare. Maybe they are more interesting, but for whatever reason, we seem to be going through like a bit of a drought. They seem to be hitting everywhere, but where we are, I think that's probably a fair assessment. And like we haven't had one in a long time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I think, if we have, it's been cloudy or something like that.
Yeah, you're right.
I've been kind of watching for them, and then there was one, but it was just anyway. And then the other thing is I'm a little bit lazy when it comes to watching for them. So I get it in my head that I want to see them, see a shadow transit. And what this is basically it's it's like a lunar eclipse going on Jupiter. And it's when one of the moons comes between Jupiter and the sun, and it casts like a nice, almost perfectly round shadow on the cloud tops of Jupiter. They're really, really neat to look at. Mm-hmm. And they do happen during certain periods quite frequently. And you will just get like one shadow though. And so then I was like trying to figure out, well, what's the best way to try to figure out if one's going on tonight? And then I can just whip out and observe it. But just all the other resources were kind of not doing it for me for whatever reason. I was just kind of lazy. And then a listener wrote, Bob, he sent us this app. I can't remember, it was either yesterday or the day before. It might have been the day before. And Bob wrote, he said, "Hi guys, just a quick note. Almost everyone has smartphones. If you want to check for the timing of shadow transits, there's a cool app called What Else? The Moons of Jupiter. Its only function is to show the location of Jupiter's moons at any given moment and where and when the shadows and moons are transiting the disk. By the way, love your podcast, Bob. Yeah, so thanks for that, Bob. I went right away and downloaded that app. There is, and I went into the Google Play Store because I was on my Android tablet, and there's two apps. There's one that kind of looks really basic. That's the one people want. There's another one that has like more of a fancy graphic called the Moons of Jupiter. I don't know if they're related or something, but the second one, or maybe the second one is paid for or something, but the second one, I don't know, it was like super graphical and blah, blah, blah. But it didn't really have much information other than a little bit of information about the moons of Jupiter. But the first one is what he described, where it will show Jupiter as a little disk, and then you can see the moons around it. They're all like noted by their first initial. And then down below, you can kind of see like their orbital path, and you can set like your time increments, the minute or 10 minutes, 30 minutes, hour, like what have you. It's all in UTC, which is the only thing that I was kind of like, meh, but I was able to get that working. Anyway, that is a great app. Did you take a look at that one, Shane? Or
well, it's not. I don't think it's available on iOS if you're using an Apple device. So, no, I did not, because I don't have any Android devices. There's a number of other apps for iOS out there. I can't comment on any of them because I've never used them. Typically, what I've just done in the past is just in Sky Safari. You know, if I want to look at Jupiter, I'll just zoom in using Sky Safari, and it plots all of that there, as well as the Great Red Spot, you know, if it's transiting at the moment or what. So, but sometimes these dedicated apps are just a lot quicker and easier.
That's right.
You know, Sky Safari, you got to center on Jupiter, then zoom in.
That's right.
There's a couple more steps, which it's not a showstopper, but when you're at the telescope, it's nice to be just a little more efficient.
Yeah. So this, exactly as you described, I like it because it's just focused on that. So you fire it up, just make sure your time is set correctly, and you got it, right? Like if you're observing Jupiter, then you don't have to mess around with everything else. And then the other thing I find is, like you said, with Sky Safari, you have to center Jupiter and then zoom in. And if you move it at all, like I was doing something else where I was trying to just take a look at the transit I was watching. Anyway, not as good. But I did have a good look at the transit of Europa. And I don't know where I put my sketching kit. So I now have two sketching kits. This is the downside of having both a graphite kit and these are very small kits, by the way. They're like 10 items that I keep in these identical canvas pouches that are super cheap on Amazon. And so I have one pouch with my graphite, and I have one pouch with my white pastel and white charcoal. And I just had the white stuff out here. I was like, I guess I must have left it in the city. I didn't even know I took it to the city, but it must be in there because it's not out of the cabin. The cabin's super small. So if it was here, I would find it. So I did a sketch of Jupiter in ink, and just like somebody's Royal Bank pen that they left here when I had a water tank delivered. And so anyway, what did you think of a blue ink sketch of Jupiter?
Well, my first thought was I sure hope you didn't make any mistakes, because that would be a lot harder to correct. But all things considered, pretty good sketch. You know, like you can definitely see like the equatorial belts, but it's the southern hemisphere. It looks like you've seen quite a bit of detail, which I've noticed that too recently, that like that southern hemisphere just seems to have a lot more individual cloud banding and detail that you can make out. I thought it was a good sketch. Overall,
so
given your limitations.
The moon shadow was on the next band just below the south equatorial band, and the north equatorial band, if I'm getting this right, had these two dominant like barges or something, like these two dark spots. And then there's another thicker band just below. So this would be there's the band just below the south equatorial band, which is the fainter of the two bands on the central disk of Jupiter. And then there's a band, like a thin band just below the south equatorial band. And then there's a slightly thicker maybe a little bit darker band below that. And then there was a really thick but very faint band, a pretty thick, rather dark band. And then at the very bottom, there was almost like a polar band of some sort. So yeah, I was able to see like 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 bands on Jupiter. And then there's some detail in between. I saw some detail in the equatorial zone as well there between the two equatorial bands. So yeah. So have you watched many of these shadow transits?
Yeah, I have in the past. I haven't seen one now, probably, I think since last season. I have not seen one this year. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I've seen a number of them. I love watching them. Again, I've said it many times. I really enjoy like any sort of motion that you can observe in real time. And our solar system provides an awful lot of that. And, you know, in particular, the Jupiter Galilean moon system, either watching the moons, you know, transit the planet or watching these shadows as they go across is super cool.
Did you ever see any of the moons in front of Jupiter?
I can't say I've visually ID'd them. Like I've known that they're there because the software is telling me that. But once I think I saw, I forget which one it was. I think it might have been Ganymede. Just as it was leaving like the disk of Jupiter from in front, and then, you know, it became very apparent. And I believe I was able to see it, but they're so small and they just blend in with the disk. How about you?
Yeah. So I think I may have a couple times before, but like you said, my observations were more like that. But last night I did sketch this, but I didn't send it because, you know, kind of referring back to what you said, if you make any mistakes, you're screwed in the ink. And I did, and kind of have to change my sketch, but I'm going to do a good copy of this. But I was going to say planet, but the moon Europa, whose shadow I was watching, the moon itself actually went across the next band down that was wider and darker. And I got it up for about 10 minutes before it exited the disk.
Oh, that's pretty neat. Well, that would give you the contrast needed.
Yeah.
You know, if it's against a back or like a darker band.
Yeah,
I could see that the moon itself would really pop.
Yeah. So that band is pretty thick and wide. And I had never even thought about it. I think when I'd seen it before, I think I was using a binocular in like a 10 or a 12 inch Schmidt-Cassegrain, and it was kind of like, it wasn't really that well defined. But last night it just popped and it looked like this tiny white little marble. It just was, and it was easy to see, even like as the scene came and went. Like I never lost sight of it after I had it. It was always steadily there, and even focused and messed up my focus for a few seconds. And I could even see it even when I had the scope out of focus. It was in focus, or not in focus, but you could see it against that. It was so such a divergence from that band. It was pretty cool. I've never seen it that well. And I was using like just under 150 power. And to me, it looked almost like it was, like I said, this totally round, sort of almost like eggshell colored. You know, you could really see like a difference in color between the moon and the white area of the area between these two bands on Jupiter. You could really see like a pretty big difference in the color there. It was really cool. I'd never seen that before, not like that anyway, and definitely wasn't expecting to see it. It was kind of one of those things where I was observing. I was going to actually stop observing, and then I was like, "What is that?" At first, I thought it was just like an oval on the edge of the band, and then like within 30 seconds to just like, oh, maybe I should sketch that. I was like, oh wow, that's actually the moon. You could see it like transit onto the band, and then I watched it as it went all the way to the edge, and then it kind of like seemed to hang on the edge for a long time. So I had it, but I had it, like I said, for about 10 minutes before it got anywhere near the edge. Like it was, I'm going to say it was about five or six moon diameters from the edge. It was pretty far from the edge. And then I watched it go right to the edge. And then it was almost like it just kind of sat on the limb for, it seemed like forever, almost created like a bit of a distortion, like when you were looking at it. And then it kind of exited off. But when it was in front of Jupiter, it was more like this paler color. Like usually the moons they seem just bright. And then as it fully exited, once it was right off the edge, and even when it was close to the edge, you could still kind of get the sense that it was this marble. And then once it was right off the edge into black space again, it just kind of was sort of that more brilliant color without the sort of contrast of the planet to tone it down in the background. So I was really shocked, because I think if you're seeing it against Jupiter itself, then you are seeing, you're seeing that disk of the moon. And I sort of switch moon to planet because it's sort of one of those things where they're almost more like planets than moons. I think those 4 big ones around Jupiter anyway.
Yeah. No, that's pretty cool. And you were using the 4-inch refractor?
Yeah, the 4-inch tack. Yeah, it's just nice. Yeah, just like the sharpness on it is like, I mean, I've seen, transits before, but just like how circular and dark that disc is, like it's pretty wild in the tack, how sharp and clear those things, how sharp and clear they appear compared to other instruments that I've owned and used. It's just that TAC 100 DC. It's just like made for observing the planets. It's good on the deep sky, but I could easily take my 5-inch Borg over it for deep sky. I think it, just that extra inch of aperture really does something. But I find on the planets, it's just like they tune that scope for the planets. So
yeah, they do work well. Like, to me, it's almost the perfect balance of collecting just the right amount of light and not too much. And then, just crystal clear image, if the atmosphere will allow it, which, allows you to see a ton of detail on the planets. That's great. That's a really good observation.
Yeah. So had a chat with Jim. He sent me an email, actually. Shall I just read it here really quick? And then
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. So Jim said, "Hi, Chris, as I listened to the podcast this morning," so this was earlier in the week, "I was happy to hear you've had some success with sketching the Witch Head Nebula. I have tried, but not yet succeeded capturing this one yet. And it is on my list to try again this winter. Since you also mentioned observing Lambda Orionis, that's like this big, huge nebulae that's around the head of Orion. Jim says, I thought you might also like this monochrome image of Sharpless 2-264, which includes this region." And then, so he sent me this beautiful 4-panel mosaic from his 50 millimeter refractor and 11 hours of exposure using a dual narrowband filter. So it's a really, really cool monochrome image of this area. And then Jim says he appreciates the astronomical pun contest, and he actually went out and bought a copy of Sue French's Deep Sky Wonders. I really wish Jim had just sent us a pun. We could have been sending him a book. But, anyway, yeah, he also sent me a copy of a color image of the Sharpless 2-264 region there at the head of Lambda Orionis, or at the head of Orion, in like beautiful sort of pinky red. Yeah, really, really neat images. And he and I went back and forth quite a bit, and we're talking about it. So yeah, definitely appreciate that. Thanks so much for writing, Jim. It's really cool to kind of do an observation and then get somebody's images of what I was observing. Yeah, that's really neat. Yeah, if anybody else out there is doing that, definitely appreciate hearing from you as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you want to read Eric's email there?
Yeah. So Eric said, "Hey, Chris and Shane." I should probably just qualify that Eric is somebody who we correspond with pretty regularly from Calgary, and always enjoy hearing from him. So he said, "I wanted to share this fun observation from a couple of nights ago, watching the moon occult Uranus. This is so cool. I've never actually watched a lunar occultation of a planet before. A few of us went out to our observatory to watch the event. As the moon approached Uranus, I couldn't believe how quickly the moon was moving relative to the planet, especially in those last 2 or 3 minutes right before contact. At high power, it appeared as though Uranus could be a lunar hot air balloon coming in for a landing upon the surface of the moon. The seeing was not very good this night, and the air was quite unstable, and the views were boiling pretty intensely. But we were still able to maintain a visual lock on Uranus until it was just a few arc seconds east of the limb of the moon. A friend had his 15 by 70 binoculars set up on a tripod, and incredibly, we could still see Uranus even when it was only around 3 to 4 arc minutes away from the moon. The intense glare of the moon, combined with quite terrible seeing conditions, meant that we lost sight of Uranus once it got within a few arc seconds of the limb. The actual moment of disappearance could not be observed because at some point it was engulfed by the boiling rim of the moon. Once it was gone, we went inside to warm up. It was actually feeling pretty chilly, getting close to 0 degrees Celsius. I think we are getting spoiled by this incredibly warm October. I can relate to that, Chris, because the recent temperatures, which were really not cold relative to what it should be this time of the year, sure felt cold.
Yeah.
Eric goes on to say, only an hour later, and moments before reappearance, intermittent clouds were flirting with the moon, popping in and out of visibility. We were screaming at the sky, "Come on, clouds, get out of here." I watched our observatory's C14, I watched through our observatory's C14 at 162 times magnification. Incredibly, at the time predicted by Sky Safari, to the very second, boom, Uranus slid back into view, coming out from behind the dark limb of the moon. That was so cool. The moon was still very close to full, around 94% illuminated. As a result, the lunar landscape was still in the same field of view as Uranus. But because it was now the terminator that was in the field of view, the moon was much less bright, and therefore Uranus stood out prominently. I'm so glad we lucked out and dodged those clouds. It was fully overcast in the city, so no one else saw it if they didn't go out for a drive. We were right under the edge of the cloud band at our observatory. It was well worth the drive. I'm loving the podcast. It's such a blast. Keep it up, from Eric.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks so much, Eric. Appreciate that.
Yeah. It's a super neat observation. And I liked his comment too about just how quick, the kind of the event happened, in particular, like the last minute to 3 minutes, as Uranus was approaching the moon. And I had the same feeling when I was watching the solar eclipse of 2017. It just seemed to take forever for the moon to slowly, cast a shadow across the sun. And, but that last couple of minutes, it just seemed to zip by all of a sudden. It was kind of funny.
Yeah, there's going to be a occultation of Mars actually on the night of opposition there on December 8th, I believe.
Okay.
For those keeping count. Yeah.
Good to know.
All right. Shall I read Ben's risky observing session report?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, this was great.
Yeah, this is a good one.
Yeah, so Ben writes, "Hi, Chris and Shane. Thanks for continuing to be my vicarious observing buddies on the other side of the globe." So Ben is in Australia, and he doesn't live anywhere near any other observers. And that's not uncommon for our listeners. So it's kind of cool that, then we're all able to sort of connect this way. It's sort of an unexpected thing, but it's really cool. And then as well, because some folks like Ben are in the Southern Hemisphere, then we got a really great Southern Hemispheric perspective. Ben goes on to say, "I wrote to you in June this year and shared an observing experience through a 24-inch Dob that, quote unquote, ruined me. And since then, he drove 3,400 kilometers to acquire a custom-built 20-inch of similar focal length. And he says it has been cloudy ever since."
Yeah, sounds right.
We're not laughing at you. We're laughing with you.
Yes.
For sure. For sure. This time I want to share a story with you about how I recently experienced the wonderful sense of astronomy brotherhood with a like-minded stranger in another country. This could be on a Halloween episode. I recently returned from a trip to New Zealand, a special place with vast amounts of pure dark skies. My family and I travel there every September. It is our nirvana, an escape from the hustle and bustle. Although I'd love to squeeze a small travel scope into the suitcase, kids and other commitments just won't allow for it. The best I can manage is a pair of 10 by 50 binoculars, a DSL camera, and a few lenses. While I enjoy this, it can only go so far in satisfying the astronomy itch when under such perfect skies. In the past, I have included astronomy tours in the itinerary at locations like the University of Canterbury, Mount John Observatory at Lake Tekapo, and these are great, but have very generic content and are geared towards high turnover tourists with little to no observing experience. This year, I wanted something a little more personal, and so spent some time seeking out a tour for small groups. I found a tour online, but never heard back from my inquiry. One afternoon, I was standing in a park while my kids played and ended up talking to another dad. I mentioned the Star Tour and asked if he knew who ran it. He told me that the tour hadn't run for a few years, then pulled out his phone and started speaking to someone about me and how I wanted to go stargazing. He then handed me his phone, and I began talking to a gentleman about observing that night. Not sketchy at all. He said he had never done private tours, but if I wanted to come look through a scope, he was open to the idea. I was very confused, to say the least, as to what had happened, but I ended up with some verbal directions to a farm and a meeting time of 8:30. So I was faced with leaving an unfamiliar town and driving in unknown country to an unknown location to meet an unknown person on a new moon night, no GPS and no international roaming. But I felt obligated to follow through on the offer. For some strange reason, my wife refused to accompany me with the kids, stating she did not want to be associated with the night of the Tanauanu murders. So, yeah, she was like, yeah, we're not doing this. You're going alone. I grabbed the car keys and headed off. What could possibly go wrong? After a few wrong turns, I eventually found the driveway to the property. It had the features of the classic horror movie, but clear skies and a new moon gave me the courage I needed. I was met by Peter and his wife. After a quick exchange, he was keen to take me out the back. Gulp. As I rounded the garden, I really want to put, as I rounded the back of the shed. As I rounded the garden, I was met with the sight of a proper observatory and a beautiful 18-inch classic Obsession Dobsonian, set up and ready to go. Peter and I enjoyed all the splendors of a very dark, very clear, very southern sky. We observed for about 2.5 hours before the dew had us beaten. The visual highlights for me were twofold: the stunning 18-inch Obsession. I wanted to observe through an Obsession for years, and the scope was splendid. The other was the Tarantula Nebula that had nebulous tendrils that just kept going. Jupiter was at opposition and looked great too. The other highlight was the generosity of both the dad from the park and Peter. It is becoming a rare thing to find people who are trusting of strangers and who are giving of themselves to help others. Sadly, Peter said that in the 10 years he has had the scope, he managed to attract very few to join him at the eyepiece. I think he enjoyed the night as much as me, as we marveled at the sky and exchanged stories about our Dobsonians. I can only hope that the experience was reflective of the broader amateur astronomy fraternity and that similar experiences are shared across the world. Maybe I'm just naive and gullible, but it definitely was an unexpected highlight of my trip. Anyway, thanks for listening. So yeah, I mean, I've had more of these experiences, I think, than many. I've done this sort of stuff quite a few times. Not sure about you, Shane.
Just once when I was in Hawaii, I had reached out to the local astronomy club there prior to getting to the island and inquired about maybe observing with some of the locals, just because I wouldn't be able to bring anything of great aperture. And one of the gentlemen in the club replied to me and said, yeah, here's my name and number. Just give me a call when you're here. And I think he had a 20-inch reflector or something like that. It was pretty big. So anyway, when I got there, I reached out to him and he said, oh, well, kind of good news, bad news. Bad news is I'm not at home this week. Good news is the telescope's just in the front yard. Help yourself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And anyway, it didn't work out for me to actually make that voyage over there. It was about an hour away. But just the friendliness, right? And the trusting, like this person had never seen my face before and was like basically, turning over the keys to the kingdom there to let me observe, which I thought was quite just a great gesture, and I really appreciated it.
Yeah, I think when I was going to Hawaii, I had chatted to a few amateurs and made contact with somebody, and very similar to Peter, or to the experience that Ben had with Peter here. But I actually, if anybody's been on Haleakala, which is the volcano on Maui, there are observatories sort of on the other side. This is like, and I had talked to another observer who had gone and said that if you're going to Hawaii, this can be an easier place to get up and observe in, because you can get right up on top of the mountain, which is only 10,000 feet, versus on the Big Island where it's difficult to observe on top of the mountain. But anyway, and yeah, I had to meet somebody at like 5 minutes before 3 o'clock, not 5 minutes after, not 3 o'clock. And anyway, go through this whole rigmarole. And I did. And I went up and met somebody, and there were like armed guards, and it was pretty sketchy. But anyway, went through the whole rigmarole. But yeah, just having moved around and lived in different places and gone to different star parties and places. Yeah, I've met a lot of strangers on back roads. You know, where do you guys observe here? Oh, well, you know, sometimes just show up at a club, and the people who observe sometimes don't go to the club meetings, and you'll just get an email address or a name and say, hey, I'm an observer, I'm new to the area. And they'll say, yeah, meet us on a rail. I remember I had a friend, he became a good friend, but he was like, yeah, we observe on a railroad track. So good luck finding that. Like, it's not on a map, right? So they give you like these loose directions, and then you're driving down like an abandoned railroad track that's had the rails and ties pulled off it at like, you know, after sunset in the dark. And it's, yeah, pretty sketchy experience. So anyway, Ben also wrote, he gave us a pun. We're having a pun contest, joke contest, if you will. Pun contest to win a copy of Sue French's Deep Sky Wonders, as donated by another listener, a local listener named Jim. So this is the first entry. Hopefully we get more. We've only had the one full entry, I think. Yeah. Ben writes, did you want to read this? Yeah, why don't you read this? I've talked to him.
Sure, yeah. So hi guys, here's a pun for a chance to win the book. It's an oldie that I love. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson go on a camping trip, set up their tent, and fall asleep. Some hours later, Holmes wakes his faithful friend and says, Watson, look up at the sky and tell me what you see. Watson replies, I see millions of stars. What does that tell you? Watson ponders for a minute. Astronomically speaking, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Astrologically, it tells me that Saturn is in Leo. Time-wise, it appears to be approximately 3:15. Meteorologically, it seems we will have a beautiful day tomorrow. What does it tell you? Holmes is silent for a moment, then speaks. Watson, you idiot. Someone has stolen our tent. Kind regards, Ben.
Yeah, I'd heard that one before. It's good.
Yeah, it is good. And just a reminder, so we are running this pun contest, I guess, if you will. You have until November 5th to submit your puns. And then the November 7th episode, we will we'll pick a winner and let everybody know. Yeah, sounds good. And if Ben is the only one, then he can look forward to get a copy of this book. It could be contest of one, but yeah, we will send it out to the winner. Thanks again, Ben, and thanks to our local listener, Jim, for listening. We appreciate that. And yeah, Jim and I are actually we were gonna try to get together and observe this week, but the clouds were not cooperative when it was clear. It was kind of late. All right. Anything else, Shane, to add to this episode? No, Chris, that is all.
All right. Well, thanks, Shane. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Be sure to send us in your puns to actualastronomy@gmail.com, or if you just want to get in touch and send us your observations, that's great too. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.